My recipe for Dutch apple pie is the best because it's easy and delicious. With a great apple filling and an amazing crumb topping, it's the best dessert for Thanksgiving. So if you want to learn how to make Dutch apple pie from scratch, I'm going to show you how. Just like all of my other apple desserts, I prepped my apples ahead of time. Here I have 750 grams of sliced golden delicious apples. That's about 3 to 3.5 cups of prepped apples. I would probably buy somewhere between 3 and 5 pounds. What I did a few days ago is I peeled them, I cored them, I sliced them, I drizzled them with lemon juice, and then I froze them. I think this is better because honestly, as the Argentines would say, it's a lot of quilombo to both prep the apples and make the pie all on the same day. Everyone is really busy. I think that's more realistic. More people will make Dutch apple pie from scratch if they prep the apples on one day and they make the pie the other day. Like I said, I froze the apples and I defrosted them, and here they are. To finish the apple filling, I'm going to add 3 tablespoons, or as I measure, 30 grams of cornstarch, along with half a cup of light brown sugar, 120 grams, and half a cup of white sugar, 110 grams. I'm also going to add some spices. I'm going to walk on the wild side a bit and add more spices than I normally would. I would normally just add half a teaspoon of ground cinnamon, but I'm also going to do a 1/4 teaspoon of ginger and 1/8 of a teaspoon of nutmeg. And to see how that turns out. All I have to do now is just mix everything together. Over here I have my 9-inch pie crust that is already par-baked. So I took a fork and pricked some holes in it, and then I baked it at 350 for 5 minutes. I still have to make the crumb topping, and I don't want my apple filling to just sit in the crust for too long. So instead of pouring the filling in right away, I'm going to put the filling off to the side, and then I'm going to work on the crumble topping. I forgot to mention that I was going to add 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt to the apple filling. Now, the next step in my recipe for Dutch apple pie is making the crumb topping. Here I have 1 stick of butter, 113 grams, and just like when I made my apple crisp, I'm going to cut the butter into small pieces. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it into squares, and I'm going to put those squares on top of each other, cut them into strips. Then I'm going to line the strips up so that I can then cut them into smaller pieces. This is very difficult, if not impossible to do, if your butter is room temperature, so make sure your butter is nice and cold. Just a few minutes later, and the butter is all cut up into small pieces. So now it's time to get my hands dirty and really make the crumb topping. I am going to do something a little bit different from most traditional Dutch apple pie recipes. I'm going to use the same topping that I use for my apple crisp. I'm going to use half a cup of everything. So just remember half a cup. Half a cup or 1 stick of butter, 113 grams, half a cup or 75 grams of all-purpose flour, half a cup or 60 grams of pecans, half a cup or 40 grams of old-fashioned oats. You can definitely use quick cooking oats if you want. I have tried both in crisp recipes and they seem to work the same, along with half a cup or 120 grams of light brown sugar. If you have a pastry cutter, you could use that. You could use a knife, but honestly, I think it's quicker and easier if you just use your hands. What we have to do is we have to get the dry ingredients to coat little pieces of butter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear a little bit of space here, and I am going to mix a little bit of each of the dry ingredients. Let's go with the brown sugar, some of the flour, and I'm not going to do the pecans right now because in my opinion it's easier to mix in the pecans later. Just going to mix everything here. Then I'm going to take my fingers and I'm just going to take the pieces of butter like this, and my fingers completely wrapped in the dry ingredients, and I'm just going to use this motion to, I guess, massage in the dry ingredients into the butter. Like this. Just press it in.
Like I already said, my Dutch apple pie recipe has a topping that's a bit different from the traditional recipes because I add oats and pecans. I really liked what the oats and pecans did in the fruit crisps, including the apple crisps that I have done this year, so I wanted to recreate that topping in this pie. Even though oats and pecans are not traditional in the topping, I think that they work because, as you know, I'm a Southern chef, and pecans and sometimes oats are common in Southern recipes, so I think it works. As a chef, sometimes you have to walk a fine line between adding your personal spin to things and staying true to the original concept.
I just finished making the crumb topping for my Dutch apple pie. I tasted it and it tastes amazing. My oven is preheating to 350 Fahrenheit, like I said. My 9-inch pie crust is par baked. So now I'm literally just going to pour in my apples.
Once the apple filling is smooth and level, it's time to sprinkle on the topping. Just like when I made my crisp recipe recently, it's very important to not press down on the Dutch apple pie topping. Although a lot of people want to pack things tight instinctively, doing so will press the crumble topping down into the soft, moist filling, and your topping won't be crispy. So just sprinkle the crumbles, the oats, and the pecans very lightly on top of the pie. Although you definitely can pick up crumbles from one area where it's really thick and transfer them to an area where the topping is really thin, just remember, don't press down.
My pie is now ready for the oven, but I did want to mention one more thing. Like I said, I think this is going to take an hour because my crisp recipes take an hour, but I'm not so sure about this crust here. I think it might start to burn before then. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to have to protect it a little bit.
By putting some foil around the edge. It doesn't have to be perfect, so just take 3 or 4 pieces of foil and wrap them around the edge of the pie.
My Dutch apple pie has been in the oven at 350 for about 35 minutes. Now I'm going to remove the protective foil so that the crust can brown a bit. I just pulled my Dutch apple pie out of the oven. It was in at 350 for a total of 1 hour and 15 minutes. Half an hour, actually 35 minutes, with the foil around the edge. And then the rest of the time, about 40 minutes without. So half an hour with the foil is what I would plan on, and then 45 minutes without.
This pie both looked and smelled amazing, so I couldn't wait to dig in and try it. Honestly, this recipe for Dutch apple pie turned out to be one of the best I have ever made. The apple filling itself was incredible. Not too sweet, not too tart. the brown sugar, adding a nice bit of molasses. Although I don't usually add a lot of spices to my pies, the cinnamon, ginger, and nutmeg that I used in the proportions that I used turned out to be perfect. Along with a hint of lemon in the background, I don't think I'll make apple pie any other way here on out. The textures were great as well, especially considering the combination of the normal crust on the bottom and the crumble topping. Like I said earlier, my recipe for Dutch apple pie with oats and pecans is a bit unique. Even though classic recipes don't have oats or pecans, I'm glad that I added them because they added so much flavor and so much crunch. So, like I said earlier, since I'm a Southern chef, I guess that I can call this a Southern Dutch apple pie recipe, and it's okay. With the soft filling in the middle, the combination of textures was complete. This turned out to be a lot better than I thought that it was going to be. I mean, don't get me wrong, I knew it was going to be good, but this was over the top good. Although a bit of ice cream would be nice, in all honesty, I thought it was better without. No need to gild the lily. Although I was a bit disappointed that the crust around the edge of the pie fell apart when I served 7 out of the 8 slices. Other than that, the pie held together very well and it was not runny at all. Part of me thought that maybe the crust around the edge would have held up better if it had more time to bake uncovered. But what I think happened is that my crumb topping is a lot thicker and heavier than most recipes for Dutch apple pie, so the normal crust around the edge just wasn't strong enough to hold everything together. Even though this pie was super easy to make, I did want to point out 2 things. First of all, this pie did bake longer than almost any of my other pies, and I think that if you don't put foil around the edge, the crust will probably get a bit too well done. So don't forget the foil. Also, be prepared for the pie to stick to the pizza pan or cookie sheet on which you bake it. The pie did boil over a bit, so I'm glad that I baked it on top of something, but some of that juice got underneath the pie plate, and as it cooled, it basically glued the pie to the pizza pan. Although I did contemplate hitting the panic button, going around the pie and very gently pushing forward and lifting up at the same time eventually allowed me to nudge the pie off of the pizza pan. I also added a little bit of soap and some hot water to the pizza pan itself. Although I didn't really need the soapy water, I think that adding soapy water and then very gently twisting the pie would be another way to release it. Although you do have to keep a few tips in mind, this recipe for Dutch apple pie is actually really easy. Since it's one of the best that I have ever had, I know it would be perfect on any Thanksgiving dessert table. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.